Yes. Okay, here we go. Hi, good morning, afternoon, evening, whenever you see this. This is Dee from INF Probably Insights. And tonight, it's night here, morning there, we have Pete from Vondelpete and with us. And he's going to take the lead, I think. So we're going to be talking about INFPs and traveling. Both of us are Bohemians. I love that word. Bohemians. We're for the Enneagram 4w5, and we're INFPs. And we're halfway across the world. I'm in North Carolina. He's in Australia. So he has got more travel experience than I do, but we like to travel. We want everybody to get out and have fun and do traveling. And then at some point, I hope to have this divided up into a couple of sections where we talk about culture and INFPs and culture, and we'll do that towards the end. So welcome, Pete.
Hi, great to be here, Dee. Great to be here on Older INFP Probably Insights. And yeah, I think you've traveled quite a lot too from the limited interaction we've had. I've ended up having traveling as being part of my identity, I think, since my 20s, where I just did a lot of office jobs that were insanely boring, and I justified it by saying every year I'll go travel somewhere and that'll be who I am. And yeah, I guess even though when I was growing up, I never had any dreams of traveling, once I got forced into it when I was 22, because there was a bunch of Aussie guys all go and do the classic, you fly to London from Australia. All Australians have to do that as like a rite of passage. Go to London, you get very drunk. And I think the Australian mentality is, you know, those Europeans, they think they've got culture and they think they're so artistic and blah, blah, blah. So Australians go there, they wave the Aussie flags, they bring their jars of Vegemite and they get drunk all over Europe. And they're very proud. And of course, I didn't want to do that. I was a very depressed acting young INFP. But there was one ISTP going along with all these STJs, and he said he's not going unless I come. I think he wanted a fellow IP type maybe.
He's dragging you along, yeah.
And I said, oh, okay. And I managed to scrape some money together, and I didn't have a job or anything, but yeah, I went off and flew to London, and we did a month-long journey around Europe, and it was very life-changing for me. I was completely changed by the time I got back. It was a very big wake-up call, and I think, yeah, it does make me think about how reclusive I was as an INFP, and like how scared I was of social situations, and how that just forced me to change quite a lot, and also really made me look at the world in a much more positive way, I think.
Oh, the world in a more positive way, yeah. Did you find when you went to the UK, did you find that you were more comfortable outside your home, or
I did.
or not? Yeah.
Yeah, as soon as I was in London, this magic feeling came over me.
Yeah.
Where, I mean, partly it was just being a bit of an Anglophile as a little kid, like loving British TV and stuff, and I couldn't believe I was in London. But a magic came over me that I didn't know where I was, and I didn't know how things operated, and that made me feel pretty calm. And that doesn't always happen with everyone, but to me, I was very calm about that. I felt like I was really cool and very adventurous. Yeah, and then
were you more outgoing, or?
Well, on that trip, there's a lot of photos of that trip of me looking extremely miserable in that group of guys. And they were fine guys. There were just quite a lot of ESFJs, ISTJs, ISTs. But they were all very nice. But I think, sorry, what was the question? I forgot. I was just going on a tangent.
Were you more outgoing?
Oh, was I more outgoing?
Were you more outgoing away from home, like leaving the country? And I have a reason for saying that, and I'll tell you my experience, and I just want to hear what yours is.
At that
I know
time,
it's a blindside. It's kind of a blindsided question, but I'll tell you mine after I listen to what you have to say.
because I was in a group of guys, I wasn't I wasn't particularly more outgoing at that time. Once I started traveling alone, I became a lot more outgoing. But because I was in a group, probably only when I was drunk, I got a lot more outgoing.
Which is easy to do when you go.
Which is easy to do.
I have stories, and since I'm as old as I am, I can't tell them anymore because I'm supposed to be. I think people think I'm supposed to be a sweet, ignorant sometimes, a sweet grandma, granny kind of thing, and that we don't want to think our parents do things. And my gosh, your grandparents can't do things, and half the people that watch that are viewers are like my grandkids' age. But yes, we did things. We were kids at one time. But yeah, I've been out of the country. I've been to Montreal twice, and which I can't remember too much about. The only thing I remember, I went to the World's Fair, and I was dragged into that with my parents. And when I was a teenager, and when we got up there, they just said, go for the whole day. I really think my parents my whole life are wishing I get lost. I don't know. They just left me to go, just go and do your thing, and we'll see you be back here by a certain time. And I remember, the only thing I remember, and I had a good time, but the only thing I remember besides long lines is that I was waiting to see an exhibit for an Asian country, I can't remember the country now. I'll remember as soon as we get off here. But it was like 2 hours long to get in, and then they shut it all down. And I'm like, what's going on? I'm asking people, what's going on? What's going on? And they said, oh, we have to shut it down and close it down because Queen Elizabeth is here. And, nobody can be in the building while she's there. And instead of saying, oh my goodness, Queen Elizabeth's here. And I was just like, who does she think she is? She's blocking the whole thing. It's 2 hours long anyway. I never saw her, but that's just
pretty amazing that she was there. Oh.
That's all I remember about that trip. But I did go overseas when I was in college with a small group, and it was to study German culture. I got 6 hours of credit for going, and basically, as you say, going to the pubs and get drunk. But I got college credits for doing that. But there were 6 of us. It was a very small group, and the rest of them, and we stayed in hostels, which I loved, and I still love hostels to this day. But we had a home base in a small village in southern Germany, which was about an hour train ride from Stuttgart. And the town is Moorhardt. Nobody has ever heard of it. I think it's a city now because I've looked it up, but it had like 500 or 600 people when we were there. And they'd never seen Americans. We'd never seen Germans, and they only spoke German. And, I was miserable for 2 weeks because I thought, the dogs know more German than I do. But I got to see everybody pass through the hostel who were students. And there were groups there from all over the world. I mean, kids, like guys, they were all guys. And from Mongolia, from here, from there, from everywhere, the whole world. And they wanted to know about America, what they had heard, and they were basically waiting for their visas to come through America, which is taking a long time back then. That was in the 70s. It still takes a long time. And but I found out from being there, I got away from the group. I was with the group, but the group stayed to themselves, and I mixed and mingled with all the other people and the townspeople. And we went to, back then it was a disco. Disco was the thing. So there was a discotheque. So I hung out with the locals, kids at the discotheque, and this, that, and the other. And I got immersed in the culture, and I found out that, I was really shy back home, and I was always doing everything wrong. And I was from a small town, and I wanted to get out, wanted to travel more. And I was always thinking I was doing things wrong. Even if I was by myself, I would tell myself I'm doing things wrong. So, but when I was overseas, and after a couple of weeks, it was like, I started thinking in German, and it's kind of like being kidnapped because I couldn't leave. So after a while, you assimilate. to survive. I think that's an INFP thing, because my friends who were there, the school, they didn't do it. They kept to themselves. They spoke English the whole time. I was dreaming in German by the time I left, but I found out that I was more outgoing away from home. And I'm wondering if it was because, and I know it's being shy and being the INFP thing. I knew it then. I thought, my gosh, I need to stay here because, you know, I'm enjoying this. It was just a whole different culture and more accepting and less competitive. It seemed to be more in tune to what an INFP is, more family oriented. They closed the stores for lunch. They weren't open at night. They were more open-minded about different things. Single motherhood. I mean, back in the 70s, you dared wouldn't tell anybody you had a baby. You went off somewhere and either had an abortion or you had the baby and gave it away, whatever. But there, they didn't care. Everything's out in the open. There were condoms in the window of the pharmacy store. I just freaked out. Like, what's this? But I'm like, whoa, you know, I've just fell into a utopia here, you know.
Yeah, know that feeling. It's interesting that you're mentioning Germany. I mean, Germany was everything changed for me in Germany. For me, that's what the big life change was. And because there's a lot of, I said that first Europe trip we did, and guys we all started fighting. We were in Spain. They did the running from the bulls, and I wasn't too happy with all of that. But
That
we were all
sounds like
arguing.
fun.
Yeah, I didn't participate, but and we were all drunk all the time. Someone got robbed, and we were going to go to France, but the Aussies started saying they hate French. Well, some of the Aussies said no, French people refuse to speak English, and blah blah blah.
They
So we
do,
settled,
yeah.
yeah, and we settled on going to Germany because the Australian guys thought, oh yeah, they drink a lot of beer, that's good, and they speak English a lot better there. And I wanted to go to Germany because I loved the idea of Berlin, and I was just obsessed with, I don't know, David Bowie and just the artistic of Berlin and him living there. So I said, why don't we go to Berlin? They all agreed. And once I was in Berlin, I noticed people dressed like me, but they didn't dress like my friends. And I don't know what else to say. I had my first kiss in Berlin in a club. I mean,
Do tell. Yeah. Well, I had to kiss a German guy in the discotheque just for the heck of it to see if it was any different. I was doing research, you know, it's research.
You're doing research. It's just research. Yeah. I mean, I was 22 at the time, so I was pretty late really to having any experience with girls or anything. I was very depressed, and I think I'd identified myself as I was chaste, and I don't know what it was, but in Berlin it all changed, and I felt so at home, and that's when I became a lot more outgoing, and I met two girls on that German trip. Both of them were INFJs, so that's what was kind of going well. I was going around meeting INFJs in Europe who looked a bit artistic and a little bit withdrawn, but and then I met a girl who was from Madrid, and I left all of my friends. This is in Hamburg.
Okay.
Yeah, and then we had a very romantic 2 days, which confused all of my friends about how I was acting and why has he just gone off with this girl, and they're all kissing on every street corner and being
Right,
super. There's tears when we leave, crying as she goes off. My friends are just sort of looking a bit puzzled, but kind of admiring me for it, but also thinking this is a bit romantic, what's going on. And that led to me saving up all my money once I got back to Australia, and she moved to the US. So I went and flew to the US the next year by myself to go and have a big romantic quest in Chicago.
Oh, Chicago. Okay. Yeah. I've been there many times. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And that's what happened. So that was another even bigger life-changing thing for me, was traveling overseas by myself purely to pursue a girl. and and by hopping around America, I was going from hostel to hostel, and sometimes I was going by myself, and sometimes I was going back to where. And I made so many friends on that trip, and I realized how capable I was. So it's like what you were saying about thinking you're not, maybe I'm not good at anything, and that voice stays with you. And even when you first start traveling, you think, oh, I'm going to get lost. How do I book hostels maybe, or how? And then all of that stuff was no issue for me. And I had no idea until I did it, until I traveled alone, how am I responsible? Am I actually really good at scheduling? Am I actually, and then the more I traveled, I realized I'm actually talented at organizing myself, staying out of trouble.
Right.
I can make friends easily in a hostel. And I was like, what? I'm social, I'm organized, because this voice in your head, I suppose, especially if you're INFP, just can really internalize that you're kind of useless, I think, especially if people call you useless a lot back home. And so I just came back with so much more confidence after that second trip to America by myself. I really never went back to the person I was before, I think.
Yeah. And I think I do that too. And then I've traveled in my old age in retirement. I've traveled the States because I thought, well, I've seen other countries and I haven't seen my own, except for around Chicago. My father grew up in Wisconsin outside Chicago. So I've been through there many times, and I love to ride Amtrak trains here in the States, and all the long distance trains leave out of Chicago. I've been there many, many times. But yeah, I enjoyed seeing, I did come out of my shell when I was overseas, and I also got a different perspective of myself and life in general. I got to see, if you live with the locals, now if you do the tourist things, you don't. And I don't suggest that anybody who wants to travel, I don't suggest going in a group. Don't buy a group. Go and
No,
just make your own itinerary, and
100.
and to get to see your own country the way other people see you is very humiliating, embarrassing and humiliating if you're from the States, I tell you. So, and I didn't like Americans half the time when I was in Europe either. But and I know most of my viewers are from the States too, like I am. But say, what, you don't like America? I do like America, but you get to see it from someone else's eyes. And when you go overseas, two types of tourists I find out from the States. One are those that are just jerks, and they're just jerks everywhere. I mean, there are a few, and they stand out because they're loud and boisterous. And then two is, I think, in the States, we have an internalized sense of entitlement, and that is we don't realize how well we have it. Everybody think like the people out of college, you go to college and then you buy a house. I did that. You can't do it anymore. And the kids now, my grandkids are complaining, I'm never going to own a house. Most of the world doesn't own a house. Most of the world doesn't own a house. Get out of the country and see how other people live. Most of the people don't even have water. I've been to the desert in the United States here where I loved, and around the Grand Canyon, I stayed a week. They don't have water. I mean, so it's just gives you a different perspective, I think.
And Australia is very similar to the US in that way. Australians don't realize how good they have it as well, I think, a lot of
Yeah.
the time. So it's so important to go and see your country from another perspective.
Yeah. And then see what I used to ask when I was over. Well, I asked, they tell me here in this country what they think of me, because they don't believe I'm from North Carolina because of my accent. That picks up. For some reason, everybody wants to know where I'm from because of my accent. I don't know what kind of accent I have, to tell you the truth. I've always been here. But when I was overseas, and talking to the kids, I was 21 when I went. So talking to the high school kids, and I was there at the height of the Vietnam War, which wasn't popular. Not to this day, is not popular. But yeah, they didn't like us. So I got into a lot of heated discussions. which were civil and friendly, but they wanted to know all about it. Why are you this way? Why are you that way? Why don't you just leave? And what, this, that, and the other. And then they were telling me things like back then in 71, they didn't even have McDonald's and all that kind of stuff. They didn't have American stuff. They had just gotten blue jeans in, Levi's. And they were $6 in the States. The same Levi's were $25 in Germany, so I didn't buy any. But they were like, well, we can hardly wait till we get McDonald's. McDonald's was a big thing. McDonald's, and you have it so much in you. And I said, no, you don't. You have everything here. Don't lose this, because it's not what it's cracked up to be. This commercialism is not what it's cracked up to be. And having a house and having a car, and they all thought, which I think it was an education, they all thought that Americans were all rich because we have cars. See, it's all in perspective, because back then very few people had cars because their train system works, and very few people own houses. And if they did, they owned the floor to a house. They didn't own the whole house. So to them, everybody was rich. And I said, oh, no, 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 no. So, yeah, you have to look at it from all those kinds of perspectives. And I do like to get back, we said about solo. I think solo travel is the key, particularly for INFPs. Think I could never do that. I like to ride trains. I like to hop trains. I've always been interested in trains.
Me too.
And for some reason. And I just go, I've been across country. I make plans, like for a couple of months, I make an itinerary. And the second day I throw it away, and I just go where I'm supposed to go and do what I do. I've been homeless in Arizona. That was a kind of funny thing. I got kicked out somewhere, but for 2 days I was homeless, but I figured it all out and wound up in San Diego, which was not on my itinerary, but I enjoyed it. But yeah, it does give you a sense of confidence to get out the door and go by yourself, I think.
It does. It's a huge thing to do. I traveled. It's interesting. I'd done so much solo traveling, and sometimes I'd go with a single friend. I realized that I was going a bit over the top with my what's it called? As you said, the itinerary. I would plan for months and months, make a perfect itinerary, and it was sometimes useful, but I got trapped in this itinerary when I went on a solo Europe trip by myself in 2010. I got trapped in it, and I started feeling anger everywhere. I went to Paris, I went to Czech Republic, Milan, and I was feeling this perfect itinerary I had made, and I'd booked all the coolest hostels, and I had a list of all the and I was not allowed to go to, like, if it was in Paris, I can't go to the Eiffel Tower. It has to be something that no one else would go to.
Exactly.
But I just, it started wearing down on me, and I was actually just getting depressed on the trip because I was being too regimented in how I'm gonna be so unique. So I had to tear it up in the end and just start floating around. And then I had all these flights booked that I never turned up to. I was in Stockholm, I was going to go to Finland, I was going to go to Luxembourg, and I just scrapped everything and hopped on a bus in Estonia and went down Latvia, Lithuania, and just but I'm glad I did that. So I learned later now I'm in my 30s. If I travel, I don't plan anything. I completely make it up as I go along, and things work out much better that way. But
they work out better, I think, because you don't have expectations.
Yeah, you go completely on that vibe and feeling, which sounds a bit crazy, but it works out, especially with smartphones. And you can go to an airport and you've got the internet, and you can do everything last minute now because of smartphones, actually.
Well, see, when I travel, I don't have a smartphone, and my GPS is in my head. And so it makes it a little harder in some ways, but it makes it more interesting because I do have to kind of think. I say people with smartphones, you can look up anything, and it's fun to get lost. You don't get lost. My father-in-law used to say, he never gets lost. He said, here's something. He was a wise man. He said, getting lost means you don't know where you are. He says, I know where I am. I just don't know how to get to where I want to go.
That's brilliant, though. Well, I should say actually, yeah, my last trip when I didn't plan it, I flew all the way to London, and after 4 hours I got bored and I thought, nope, I'm out. And I went to
Yeah.
Berlin, got bored, and it was during Omicron and all the pandemic stuff, and I ended up in Turkey and what, but it didn't. But the other thing is my smartphone, I made sure I didn't get a SIM card, so I couldn't
Okay.
actually be on my, because that ruins your trip. Yeah, if you're an
Yeah.
INFP, don't travel the world by yourself, but just stare at your
Right.
screen while you, because I've done that before, and it's very, very detrimental as well. So you've got to yeah, don't make sure that you're off the grid a little bit
Right.
and
Right. Right.
forced to look around, forced to,
Right. Yeah,
yeah,
I like to get immersed in the local culture and food. Food's my thing. Is that the first thing I do, and I would suggest that to anybody traveling, that the first thing I do whenever I go anywhere is I ask where do the locals eat.
yes. And yeah, now I feel like I'm an expert INFP traveler after the first few, like 20,
Yes, we
yeah,
are.
yeah. And by the time I was 29 and maybe 31 on the Europe trips around, I went around Lithuania for 2 weeks cycling, and it was fantastic. And I was an expert by this point. I knew to because when I first started traveling, the hardest thing was to go into restaurants alone. And I think a lot of
Yeah.
INFPs have that fear. Just, oh my God, just walking in and maybe everyone looks at you.
Right.
And once I broke through that, yeah, it's just like, yeah, bring a book, walk in, smile, always look for whatever. If you can't read the menu, ask for a recommendation. Anything the
Mhm.
locals eat, anything, whatever's local, the local beers. And that's what I do. I've done for the last 10 years. Anytime I travel,
Right.
and anything local, and if you feel awkward in a restaurant, just have your little book there, and it's all a beautiful
Yeah,
experience.
to sound smart too, like you know what you're doing. If you don't,
Yeah,
talking about looking at the menu, I always ask, "What's your specialty?"
yeah. Hmm.
You know, so I watch a
Yeah.
lot of cooking. I watch a lot of chef cooking shows. You know,
Yeah.
they always have their little specialty. What's your specialty? And and try it. It, people enjoy that you take an interest in them and their culture. Now we're mixing the culture all together. I don't really care, but they, whether it's in the same country as you or whether it's in another country, people enjoy you taking an interest in them, and you're not just passing through. And you, like you said, you didn't go to the Eiffel Tower. I don't do that either. When I was in Arizona, I didn't go to Arizona to go to the Grand Canyon. I was nearby, and I forgot why I wound up in Arizona. I forgot now why. But I stayed there a week, and people say, "Oh, you got to go to the Grand Canyon. You got to go to the Grand Canyon." Like, why? It's just a hole in the ground. That made people mad. But and I know it's not just a hole in the ground. It's one of the seven wonders of the world. Whatever. I know that, but that's a tourist attract that doesn't interest me. I did go to the Grand Canyon, but it didn't interest me as much as walking around and going into the local grocery store, going into the pub, going in wherever, and just what do
Do yeah.
people eat? What do people do? You know.
It is a bit of a INFJ, INFP, ENFP kind of thing where you're a little bit, there's something really distasteful about you've got to go here because
Right.
that's what you do. And I think when I think of other INFP and ENFP and INFJ friends I've got, they're all the same as well. They're like, there's something really a bit repulsive about just doing it because other people do it. And yeah, that's huge for me. And it's sometimes I felt guilty about it because there's these things that really are significant, historical places, but I still want to go because it's what you're supposed to do. And for my own
Right.
personal narrative, I guess part of it is I want to appear cool and mysterious and bohemian because I'm a
Right. Yeah.
4w5. It's huge. Why would you want to do anything that other people do? So sometimes I used to fight that, and now I relax a little bit, but I think it is still a good thing to do. It's like your mission as a INFP and as a 4w5. It is your mission to explore the unknown and communicate to other people something new, I guess, something a bit more unique if you can find it.
Yeah. I know before COVID, the pandemic, you shut travel down everywhere, but before the pandemic and me hopping trains, and a lot of people do it, but they plan. I'm on Facebook groups and they plan it and they go slow and this, that, and the other. I don't run marathons and that kind of thing, but and it is challenging, but I went over 20,000 miles on the train in about a year and a half. And I went cross country, I think 6 times, there and back 3 times on 3 different trains. I want to do the trifecta of the major routes and to do that. And I did it in coach, which has been, I spent 2 weeks. Each trip was 2 weeks. So I was gone. I packed a backpack. I probably looked homeless. I probably did look homeless. That's why out west I was not as accepted as I was on the East Coast. But yeah, I just packed a backpack and a duffel bag and I hopped on and I rode all the way through. I didn't get off like people would go halfway. They go to Denver and they get off for 3 or 4 days, do the sights here. Oh, I know why I went to Flagstaff. I was going to go to Sonoma.
Right.
I was going to go because it's a spiritual place. I never made it to Sonoma. I wound up in San Diego instead, which was perfect. But yeah, so I just get on trains and then I talk to the people on the trains. And in coach, you get to know folks. And I talk to the people on the trains. And then after a while, they talk to me because they find out that I have a YouTube channel. And I do have a channel about traveling. That they think that's interesting. I'm kind of a semi-star or whatever. I don't know. But like I feel like I'm on The Amazing Race.
Yeah.
try going cross country on American train in coach. It's interesting. And you go several days and you learn how to sleep, you learn how to do this, you learn how to do that. But there was a whole lot to do, and you can only do it or I could, I think, only do it solo. I can't find anybody who wants to go anywhere with me. They think I'm too weird. But and a friend of mine asked me when I went on my last trip, she said, "Why do you do that to your body?" I'm like, "Do what?" Because it is hard. I mean, it takes me a month to recover after I get home. And she said, "Why are you doing that to your body?" I'm to go places. And I said, "Because it's there. Why do people climb Mount Kilimanjaro? Why do people do anything?
Yeah, that's true. That sounds so cool. I should do that in the US. Just
So you
I
just
did do
hop a train and I get the path and you just and one guy thought it was funny. I always pack a bunch of bananas because potassium's good for you. I pretend like I'm an athlete. I train for it. I get you have to be in physical shape. You have to do all this kind of stuff. And I do it. I'm not going to do it anymore. I've done it enough. But and he laughed all the way back on one trip, my last trip back to Chicago from the West Coast. And he's like, "I can't believe you brought some bananas with you." And I'm like, "Yeah, that's good. It's good to eat." And then before he got off the train at, I felt like I had made it now, but before he got off the train in Chicago, that's where he got off. Oh, we all got off, but that's where he was staying. I had to catch a train back to North Carolina. But he went to the cafe car and he came back and brought me back all kinds of snacks. I mean, I felt like these through hikers that get the trail angel things. People give them stuff all along the trail when they hike. So he bought me a whole bag of energy drinks and snacks and things.
Yeah. Should we talk about, I guess, INFPs in different cultures as well?
Yes. So you tell me about that.
Well, I used to about 5 years ago when I was really getting into Myers-Briggs stuff. I kept reading, trying to read like official MBTI statistics on what people are typing themselves in different countries, and it got a bit ridiculous in the end. Like in Japan, the most popular personality type is INFP according to this report, and in India they did a study and there was 0% INFPs in India, and I thought, okay, well, this is a bit dumb.
Oh, really?
Especially when I've got a few Indian friends who are INFPs, but so they're not necessarily doing these tests very well. I think in America and the US, and Australia, I mean, They've done a kind of larger studies, and you know, you start seeing, I think in the US and Australia, ISTJ is the most common type amongst males, ISFJ the most common type amongst females, ESTJ, ESFJ, and you do sort of get the feeling that's when in day-to-day life, anywhere you go, it does. You do feel like the SJ types are the most common. I do kind of believe everywhere they're out, and it's probably for the best in the world that we've got more structured types keeping
Oh yeah,
societies.
everywhere I go is a SJ. Yeah. Um, the only person I've ever traveled with was the one I talked about who gave me the white socks. I got her ISTJ. She was hard to travel with. We were never satisfied. She's too organized, and then I wasn't organized, and then, you know, if I didn't talk to her, she got mad. And if I talked to her, I didn't know what she wanted. So we just kind of separated. We went our separate ways. But
it gets difficult. I mean, I traveled with my ESTJ brother once, and the amount of arguments, because he's like, "Where are we going?" We're gonna. I don't know where we are, but let's go down that road, and then just exploding. No, you threatening me. You tell me where we are. We're in a Sri Lankan village. I don't. And it came to blows. It came to me attacking him. It was ridiculous. But
well, I will have to say I did get hit. I had the map thrown at me. She threw the map. She said, "Shut up." She threw the map at me.
But without trying to pick on STJs too much, I traveled with an INFP friend in Japan. This was one of the few times I traveled with a friend, and that became an issue too, not to that degree at all. But he hadn't traveled alone in his life. He still hasn't. Um, and he was very frustrated traveling with me in Japan. It was easy to get lost with him and chat, and that wasn't a problem. But he was acting. Okay, this is going on a tangent. We'll go back to the topic. But yeah, he was an INFP who hadn't traveled by himself, and by this point, I traveled a lot by myself.
Mhm.
And he was behaving a little bit like I was behaving on my first Europe trip. I was being a sook, you know. I was in a bad mood, and I wasn't hiding it from the guys. I was just frowning, storming off by myself quietly, upset at uh, following other people's plans. And I think the reason he would want to stay in the hotel during the day, stare at his phone, get
Oh,
just in a bad mood if I suggested let's go out for breakfast, and he'd roll his eyes, you know, and he'd just give me the silent treatment, and it was just over silly things. And I think, firstly, he hadn't solo traveled in his life, so. And that's not to say he wasn't he was in Melbourne in Australia. He drives around aimlessly and he lives in his own little dream world. But being in another country, maybe he just wanted to escape into his phone and not open himself up. And I think the other thing is I was in charge of the itinerary because he wasn't taking initiative, so I took over. But I think you've made a video about this. INFPs you shouldn't be like a sidekick, or don't be a
right.
side.
Yeah, we're psychics. Yeah.
And I think he was my sidekick because he wasn't gonna give me any input into where he wanted to go, no matter what I asked. So I said, okay, and I said, so I'll just take over. Yeah, sure, cool. But I think deep down he was just like very annoyed that he's following my plan. And sometimes I did leave him in the end, and we eventually, because I guess we're both INFPs, we would have a big falling out and then apologize the next day and make up quite easily. And we had 3 or 4 big fights, and we would always make up the next day. So we but I think that kind of shows like I could really see in him myself when he was just sort of complaining about where we're going next, but not wanting to take the initiative to decide for himself where does he want to go. So trying to sort of do it both ways. And that's what I was doing with my friends, I think, 15 years before. I was being in a bad mood when other people were making decisions for me, but I wasn't going to put out my own. I wasn't going to take. So you've got to. I think it's good for INFPs to just take the lead. I traveled Eastern Europe with a ISFJ friend who again didn't put any initiative into the itinerary or anything and let me take over. But it's okay because he was an ISFJ. He was kind of happy to be my sidekick. A bit sure. So I planned every hostel, and he really enjoyed himself wherever I took him. He enjoyed everything that I laid out, and I made most of the decisions, and he was happy to go along with it.
So that's the
Um,
ISFJ. So I'll have to write that down. ISFJ will
you want a
appreciates
sidekick?
what you do. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
get an ISFJ sidekick, and they'll obey you and be happy with the experience with
Well,
the
that's
experience.
interesting that you took initiative, because it's not like an INFP to take initiative to do the planning. That seems more of a judging
It's
thing. Um,
yeah, I
it's
think
a,
it's right.
but
INFPs.
it's interesting. That is true with traveling, and even with INFJs, I can hang around with them. And I was trying to try. The only time I was going to travel with an INFJ, they let you, the INFPs, they do, even though that they like to be in control and they like everything organized, which is fine. They will let the INFP do the itinerary, but this one friend I have, I still have her as a friend. We were planning a trip to Georgia. I was planning the trip to Georgia, and then I didn't realize, and she forgot to tell me that she was moving before we were supposed to go to Georgia. So I don't know how that was ever going to work.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
but they do tend. You said your ISFJ let you do it, and you did it, and that my INFJ friends let me do it, and I did it. Um, what's interesting to me, what I have done to people like that before, and it's kind of a mean trick, I guess. When I was a lot younger, I got tired of doing all the planning because I really don't know. I don't care. I mean, I think that's a lot of INFP thing. We don't care. We don't have to go to a certain restaurant. We don't have to go to a certain, we don't care. We're laid back. We're fine. As long as we eat, we're fine. And so one time I was out with somebody that I had to make all the plans. Every time I thought, well, I'm not going to this time. You make the plans this time, like wherever we're
mm,
going to eat. And we rode around town like 2 hours, and because they couldn't decide.
yeah.
I'm like, just pull in somewhere.
I mean, and I mean, like, I think INFPs. I think the reason they can do a good itinerary is it's like writing a script for a narrative because it's so exciting. You're in a different culture, and it's driving that. And the other thing with INFJs and ISFJs, just to get a bit into the alphabet soup,
Yes.
it's they've got what is it, blind spot extroverted thinking, you know. So even though INFJs, and I've traveled with INFJs, and I love traveling with INFJs. I think they're great. And they're very good. They are very good at planning and organizing a trip if they want to, and they obviously, oh, often they do want to. But there's just little things when it comes to being on top of certain decisions where INFPs, I think, can be better. I've traveled with INFJs and ISFJ girls, two different girls, girlfriends I've had. Yeah, and it was little things at the airport, just little things dealing with the apps, dealing with
Yeah.
bureaucracy, where I was a bit shocked at like they weren't understanding this little but bureaucracy thing that I could be on top of. I think INFPs know how to follow the rules a bit better because INFJs
Yeah.
and ISFJs, even though you might think ISFJs have got a reputation for being rule followers, they're actually not great at following rules a lot of the time. Both INFJs and ISFJs are really about their own logic and they need things to make sense to them. So that makes them very smart and logical in some ways, but when it comes to following blindly bureaucracy, I think they get a bit stuck. But I think INFPs are a bit like they're not super logical, but they know how bureaucracy works. And they're like,
Right.
that's what they, oh, this is all I need to do. Bang. I just need to press bang. I'll cover everything so we don't have to think about it. So that's the INFP approach, I think. So I don't know if that makes sense, but
Yeah.
that's what I think.
Well, I never thought about it that way, but that is true. And I will do that. And I'm just in life, I tend to be efficient because it's not that I'm efficient. I just want to get it out of the way.
Yeah, because
And
it's so
tell me what you want to do, and we'll just do it. Which reminds me of a trip that two of my daughters took to New York from North Carolina. We all live here, and one is very outgoing. I'm going to say she is an ESFJ, she's the one that told me my bar stools were wrong. But they went to New York. The other one is my whatever child. I don't know what she is, but she's definitely laid back, the most laid back person I've ever seen in my life. She follows the other one around. They went to New York City and they had to catch the plane. Okay, so they were late. They were always late. And they didn't take the subway. They took a cab. No, they Ubered. And I thought, oh, that's the wrong thing. Subway will get you there quicker. I'm thinking, as the story was being told to me, I'm thinking, oh, you're doing the story whole wrong. So they decided to Uber, which they got caught in traffic. They got caught in traffic. Subway, you don't, just go. They could have been there in 10 minutes. They were running late. Well, they get to the airport. The I can't do the alphabet soup. What did I say? ESFJ, the really outgoing super one, went and tried to check in at the last minute. I don't know how airports work because I don't fly, but you can do it right there at a little kiosk thing. And she hit the wrong button and got herself on the plane to Boston, which is in the opposite direction. She has to be at work. This is nighttime, and she has to be at work at 5 o'clock in the morning. So he just come from New York City down to North Carolina, and they missed the flight because they're not going to Boston the wrong way. So she got my other daughter to rent a car from the airport, and they don't know how to drive in New York City. So they rented a car and had the ESFJ had the other one, the whatever, drive so she could sleep because she had to be at work at 5 o'clock in the morning. And I'm thinking, if you'd had somebody like me, we would have been on the subway and we would have gotten there in time and everything would have been smooth.
It's so weird, isn't it? Because I think INFPs, they do struggle with all these things. I don't know why it's like maybe I love traveling as well because this side of me comes out where I'm super organized and I can, especially in my last trip to Europe with all the restrictions around Europe, and I still decided to travel and do all of the testing and all of the stuff during the pandemic, and I managed to pull it off. I was like so efficient, but I don't have that motivation in usual daily life back home. It's just
No, that's too mundane. I think it's more exciting. It's an adventure, and getting back to the Bohemian part to the stuff.
Yeah.
And the wanderer, it's more fun when you're wandering, exploring. The exploring part is the exciting part. Yeah.
Nothing makes me happier than being that kind of getting lost somewhere overseas and then finding my way back. I'm just so happy at the end of it. I'm just
like you made it. Yeah.
And even when I'm in danger, I'm somewhat happy for some reason. Depends on how much danger, but like a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, I haven't gone overseas by myself. I'm not going to go overseas. Well, that's a whole other thing. But with an American passport, I said I'll go with the Canadian one. But I don't think it's I don't think it's that safe. But I'll just try to meander around my own country at my age. I would like to go to Australia, but I don't fly. That's the only way to go. The airplane. The flight is so long. So.
And then when I go to Europe, though, it's like 22 hours. I don't know how I do it. Anyway.
22 hours. Oh gosh. I don't know what people do for that long, but yeah, but talking about the cultures and INFP, I have heard, I think Eric Thor did I don't know if he really researched, he probably did a little bit, but he has a video where he was talking about he did research, and I think he just looked a little bit of where all the INF, I think it was INFPs he wanted to look like. He's not one, but he likes INFPs, where they all are in the world, where they're concentrated. And actually, it may be true, and see what you think. He found out it was Scandinavia. I mean, he's in the Netherlands, so that general area, I'll say Scandinavia, that general area has more INFP-ish type of culture.
I have to say, these things, like, even though maybe there's a basic distribution around the world of types that is kind of similar, and I do kind of believe most cultures are just filled with SJ types of some kind, but Japan and Scandinavia and Germany and the Netherlands particularly, sometimes I'm like, you get a complete vibe. You enter the country and there's something going on with the energy of everyone in this whole city. You can feel it. It happens in Japan particularly. Something about a lot of INFPs get obsessed with Japan, and it's like this culture in some ways is really lending itself to INFPs, at least in terms of the way people interact. There's a real fear of
Oh,
confrontation in Japan. And then when I'm in somewhere like Germany or the Netherlands or Sweden, I haven't been anywhere else there. But in Finland as well, I felt like there's something that's really like I'd get on a train in Helsinki for a random example, and I'm just like, what's it? All these people reading books and writing on notepads and looking intellectual, and I'm like,
uh-huh.
this is not going to happen in Australia. Um, I don't see that ever in Australia, and Germany, I had that vibe immediately too. Why am I shining in Berlin all of a sudden? And why are my STJ friends feeling a little STJ? You might associate with Germans as well, but I don't know. In Berlin, I was like getting a vibe, but that this is culturally going to work out a lot better for me. And when we were on random trains getting drunk, it was just me talking to these intellectual Berliners, and getting on really
Okay,
well with
yeah.
them. When I went to clubs, as I said, I was meeting girls, which just wasn't going to happen in Australia. Um, all these INFJs, it felt like. I don't know. There's no real. It's all just stuff to ponder. I don't know
Yeah,
what.
I don't know if it's just so that's something for people to think about, and they can comment, and whatever their experiences are. What is it? I've never been to Asia, and I'm never going to go, I don't think. But what is it about Japan, do you think? What specific kinds of things made you feel more comfortable as an INFP there? Like a specific thing.
Specifically, it's the fact that they're not. There's something that's not very. Even though it's quite an organized country, there's something when you get into the bureaucracy of Japan. Because I lived in Tokyo and
Uh-huh.
I've traveled there so many times. They're not actually very logical in a
Okay.
weird way. Makes Germans a bit annoyed when they're in Japan. They can be very frustrating in Japanese bureaucracy where they will outright lie to you to avoid confrontation. Hi, I'm trying to buy a phone. We don't sell phones. Are you sure? No. I mean, that makes me angry, but
Yeah. So
oh,
the
there's just
non-confrontational, okay. Which is
there's
it's all interesting because they are some of the smartest people in the whole world as far as
yeah.
testing and education and all, it's
I've heard that in Asia, but Japan's got its own variety of it. And I honestly I feel particularly comfortable sometimes with Chinese and Koreans and Japanese. I don't feel the same way in Southeast Asia. So it's just a thing. It might come from Chinese culture. There's this idea of holistic thinking in Asian culture where they like to get the entire big picture of something before they make a decision. And they say that that's
okay.
different to European or American, which is more specifically looking pinpointing certain details to make your decisions. But there's something in the culture and the thinking in Asia in general where they're a bit holistic. I think
Mhm.
it's coming from that. Japanese do tend to it's you feel like you're being listened to a bit more, and you feel like they're trying to apply a big picture logic to a lot of things. So it's a bit hard to explain, but the stuff that I knew a lot of Americans when I lived in Japan, and they would get a lot more angry at the evasiveness and the indirect. There's a lot of indirect communication in Japan. So much is said through body language. So much is said by what you don't say, and the Japanese have this
Oh,
whole idea of reading the room. Everything's reading the room. What is not being said. So I think when you look at it that way, you can understand why an INFP is like, I'm fine with that. If that's
uh-huh.
their
Yeah.
where everything's a bit unsaid and you've got to read between the lines and everything, I think that makes INFPs a bit more comfortable, maybe.
Oh, okay. So whenever I around anybody from Japan, I have to watch my body language more, I guess.
And there's a lot of Japanese people who don't operate that way. They're just
I
people,
know,
I think.
yeah.
But yeah, yeah, definitely they're big on body language and all of that sort of stuff.
But it's
And
more of I think, yeah, now that you mention, I think it's more of I'll use the word mindful is the big buzzword now, more mindfulness
Yeah,
in that general area than other parts of the world. Yeah.
but they've got
Yeah.
their massive problems, and they're a very capitalist society, and their whole society is also geared up to overwork people, and there's a lot of fake
Oh, yeah.
culture and distract them, and that's awful. I love meeting INFPs overseas. I met an INFP guy in Bulgaria when I was traveling with my ISFJ friend, and it was
Uh-huh.
fantastic. I started speaking to him Japanese, and he got angry at me. Like, not angry at me, but he was speaking in English, and then I chatted a bit more, and I'm like, oh, he's just an INFP. He's like, I didn't come to Bulgaria for someone to speak Japanese to me. I'm here to get out of Japan, and he started talking about how restrictive Japan is, and how there's a whole world out there, and why he only travels by himself, and he doesn't go on tours, and he's here to do things that other Japanese people wouldn't do. And he was, doing it in that INFP way where they're talking a lot about all this stuff, and they're talking
Right.
endlessly, still a softness to their voice, and they still seem a bit fragile, and a great guy. I've met a lot of INFPs traveling like that, and they're all doing that same thing, especially Japanese INFPs who are doing this big quest to break out of their Japanese culture, and something about it makes them seem even more Japanese to me.
Because yeah, I've always thought of it being more controlled.
Yeah.
That's from a female point of view. They're more subservient type. They've been told to be, not the leaders and not the this and not the that. So I've come from a whole different generation, but like that. I had to laugh when you said your friend, don't you? Why are you speaking to me in Japanese? That happened to me when I was in Germany. I took the train from the group, and they went to England. And it's kind of funny. I wouldn't go through France. You had to go through France on the train to get to England. I said, I'm not going to France because they don't speak English and they don't like Americans. Like you had mentioned earlier, I don't know if that's stereotype or what, but that was my thing. So I went to, my father had a pen pal in high school who was German. And of course, during the war, they lost contact, but they got back together. I went to visit his family by myself. I didn't do one solo thing. And I followed directions. The guy to get off the train, change trains. I had no idea how to do that. But his daughter was showing me around town, and she was speaking to me in English, and she was being very polite. And I looked at her like, it's like, I didn't come here to speak English.
Yeah.
I came here to learn German. And then she started speaking to me in German, and she was a whole lot more intelligent and educated than I was. She was using bigger words than I had learned in German. So I should have probably just stuck with English with her. But I did the same thing. I'm like, I came to learn to do something else and to broaden my horizons here. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I try not to be too, as I get older, I try not to be too elitist with all that stuff and traveling, and
Yeah. I try to fit in and wherever I go. So until I open my mouth, and then people know I'm not from there once. It's interesting when you try to fit in and you think you're fitting in, and the people who live there know that you're not from there, but you think you are. I mean, you think you're, you think you've assimilated a little bit, and then the locals don't buy any of that, but they tolerate you and they roll their eyes. You can tell.
But I think again, from that year of living in Tokyo and meeting quite a lot of foreigners who had come to Japan to teach English, and they'd reach about 3 or 4 months, and they'd go from loving Japan, usually loving anime
Right.
and loving it, and then they crashed into rage. And every time you'd meet another foreigner, they're like, Japanese people will never accept you, and they will, even if you speak Japanese to them, they don't want it. They just want to speak English, and you'll never be Japanese no matter what you do. And I always thought, like, who cares? I loved being. My best friend in Japan was an INTP, and there was a girl in my house who was a British INFP, so
Okay.
pretty well with them. And we'd have these discussions, and like, we don't want to be. That's the whole point. We're outsiders. We love being outsiders. We like standing out, living in
Right.
Japan, and we wanted to be the weird person, so we embraced it. And I always felt that living in Japan, you're the only, they're not treating you like other Japanese people, and you'll always be a foreigner to them. And I thought, who cares?
Right.
I don't know.
Well, that seems to be a common theme and thread. I think maybe worldwide. I don't know, even just locally here at the other end of the state. I'm in the center part of North Carolina, but I lived in the mountains. And where I live full time for 4 years, and they have this unwritten rule, and I laughed at it in the beginning, but it's true. You have to live there 8 years before they'll accept you as living there full time. And I lived there only 4 years, and the fourth year they started speaking to me like I wasn't an alien from Mars or somewhere. And I worked there full time, and I thought, well, I live here. That no, you don't live here. You ain't been here long enough.
Gonna do the full 8 years, and then
8 years, yeah. They have a thing. It's 8 years.
And when
And
you
I
tick over
laughed.
the 8 years,
Yeah, when I moved, I laughed, but it's true. It's 8 years. And the fourth year, I got started being a little bit accepted. Yeah, I moved after the fourth year, so I was never accepted totally. It's 8 years. Yeah, I don't know who came up with that number, but so I think that's
yeah,
a thing, maybe worldwide. Maybe that's the thing worldwide.
it is worldwide. People are very tribal. It's just how people are. I just
No,
think
I
it's
mean,
fun.
like I just said, I'll have to backtrack it. Everybody's clicking off. I said the French don't like Americans. That's just what we hear. I mean, maybe there's something to I think maybe it has to do with protecting their own home territory, that we're outsiders. Like you were outsider in Japan, I'm outsider in the mountains, and then maybe the French want to protect their but they don't speak I mean, back in the 70s, they would not speak English. And I didn't go there. I mean, I didn't lose anything by not going. It wasn't on my itinerary. Hanging out in the pubs with the kids at the hostels turned out to be on my itinerary after I got there.
Yeah, good. Yeah, and experimenting with kissing people.
Research. It's research.
Research.
I actually did that, and I will say this, and then we'll just leave because I'm getting punchy. But my research was to find out what country kissed the best.
What was the result?
There was a German, and the German guy had a girlfriend. His girlfriend was sitting right there, and I said, "Well, girlfriend is sitting right there," and they said, "We don't care here," and I'm thinking, "Well, we do it back home." And then there's a guy from England. He was German, but he studied in England and lived there, so he was mainly English. And and I'm like, yeah, let me just see. I'm doing research, and we'll see.
Just research.
So that's a little tidbit that everybody is just unsubscribed from the channel now.
We might get more subscribers. Name the entire YouTube video about your research.
But so that's another reason INFPs need to get out. If you're alone and lonely, there's a whole world out there.
Yeah, my INTP friend always laughs at me saying, he's like, "I respect you, Peter. You have a policy. You don't kiss in your own country." It's like the philosophy of some people don't hook up in the workplace. Peter, you only have relationships overseas. That's your thing. That's cool.
Yeah, and I think it's a good thing for INFP thing is because you probably never, well, you did, you went to Chicago, but you're not going to see them again. So it's no big deal. Nobody's going to talk about you because you're not going to see them again. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely I don't like that pattern that I accidentally got into my team. I don't know if that was exactly my mindset, but I think unconsciously it took the pressure off. I think, whereas I think I was always a bit more fearful in my own city about if I meet up with somebody, what if I really don't like them and then they decide they want to marry me, and how am I going to? That was always my fear.
And you were going to have their kids and all this kind of stuff after knowing them for 20 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah, and I thought, being a very non-confrontational INFP, I was like, oh, how do you let them down? What do you do? I don't want to ghost anymore. I think that was my mindset.
Yeah, it's a simple thing. That's one reason I like the trains. You're not going to see them after you do that. But you go overseas, and if you're really young, like I said, that's why I did all these polls on my channel. Who's here? Because it changes. I don't think since this year, I think a lot of people have changed. They've gotten a lot younger. They used to be a lot older. They've gotten a lot younger. So for you, those of you out here there, take a gap year from whatever. It's a good time. Take a gap year from your work, from your school, travel. There's a whole lot of excitement. See, we're telling you all about Europe and
and stuff that, like, if you were like me, when I was 21 and I didn't want to travel because everyone was doing it, and my
yeah.
idea was everyone's going on these tours and everyone's getting drunk, and everyone, that to me, I was like, I don't want to do that. I'm going to be unique by not traveling. But no, you've got to find your own unique way to do it that's going to appeal to you, that'll be different than how other people will do it. And yeah, make sure you do everything in your own unique style. And yeah, do not. I despise tours. I've never done one, but I
No.
once I've done like a 5-hour tour in Romania, Dracula's castle, with a bunch of drunk Irish guys. And um, no, after that one few hours experience, no, never again. Do everything in your own unique. Yeah.
Exactly. I see that on Facebook groups all the time. People want to go somewhere by themselves, and it's usually women. I don't see it too much with men, but with women, and I'm scared to go alone. And they say, well, take a bus tour. It's a 1 hour to see the city. And I'm thinking, that's the worst thing you can do. Just go. If you have to walk, just go and pretend like you live there. Just pretend like you live there.
Clever about it. I mean, when I was traveling with my ISFJ friend, actually hostel hopping around Romania and Bulgaria, every hostel, it was
Yeah.
fantastic. A nice ISFJ and a nice INFP boy. You'd always get these drifting female travelers traveling alone, and they would always quickly kind of cling to me and my friend. And I reckon it's definitely like they're female solo travelers, but there's always a little bit of danger when you're female. So I think they would
Yeah.
look who are some nice guys I can hang out with and feel a bit, because it happened every hostel. We'd get some random girl with us, just sort of and I think they're looking for nice guys just to hang out with, and they feel a bit safer. I don't know if that's what it was, but
Well, now you're
I sort
talking about me when I was 20. So
of,
I was hanging out with the guys. And now when I go, I find out young guys hang out with me. And I think they kind of want to protect me. Because I stay in hostels here in the States. And because I just love hostel, and people from all over the world are there, and I don't care. I don't have that much of an ego anymore that I got to stay in a private room in a 4-star hotel. I don't like that. Put me in a bunk bed, I'm fine. But there will be one or two young, I mean, in their 20s, like really young guys there from different parts of the world that'll adopt me, kind of like make sure that I'm talked to. I've had something to eat, or I've done this, or would you like to go here, or, kind of thing. And I never want to go with them because I feel like it's a tour.
yeah, yeah. It's quite lovely though.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
so it's great for really young people, and for really old people. I don't know how the in between works out or not.
same kind of thing, I guess. I guess
The
I'm in the middle.
the middle age. So yeah. So
Yeah.
well, we've talked a long time. This has been, I could talk all night long, and it's your morning. But anything else that we need to know? Words of wisdom.
Words of wisdom.
Yes,
No,
more
I was
words of
trying to.
wisdom. I've enjoyed this. I like to laugh. You make me laugh, so I love to laugh.
No, thank you. You make me laugh too. So I knew it'd be great to chat to you. Thanks for your videos. I love watching them. And yeah, no, the only words of wisdom is for two Bohemian travelers. Just find a way to just make life interesting and engaging and magical for yourself. It'll fight depression. I don't know. That's my
Yeah.
insight.
Yes, it will. So again, this is Pete, vondelpete. Check his channel. It's vondelpete, one word. And I'll have a link to it below in the description box. And until next time, everybody, stay safe.